Um, for me, kicking around old barns as a kid in Adams County. I grew up in Baltimore, but we spent a lot of time up here on the weekends. I moved here in the early 90s. They've really had a profound, lasting impact on my own career, ultimately informing and inspiring, what I ended up doing for a living. Um, Walking into the expanse of one of these iconic structures is sort of cathedral-like, and with a crew of like-minded craftsmen throughout the county, we've sort of tried to carry on this tradition of timber framing. This is some joinery down in a building in North Carolina, just all hand done, creating these open expanses, these interiors. This is a residence here, but it sort of echoes this timber framing construction that's seen in virtually all of our historic barns in the county. Basically facing the same engineering difficulties that these timber framers of years past did, but trying to transform it into a sort of a more modern application. Here's a tie beam joint here and a bent in a barn, and a very similar situation in a building we built, a house down in Frederick back in 2010. Frame construction, all mortise and tenon, held together exclusively with pegs, and you can see the heavy knee brace coming down from the timbers to give the structure stability. Here I am, quite a bit younger. And here's my buddy Lee Sorensen, hand cutting the joinery in the shop. Pretty much it's a sort of a puzzle construction with barn construction and timber framing, where you lay everything out off-site, cut all the joinery, and then get it all stacked and labeled and ready for assembly. And here you can see probably 40 timbers ready to roll on a job of ours. The timber frame construction is basically predicated on structural cross sections called bents, B-E-N-T, and here you can see 4 bents pre-assembled on a deck, ready to tip up one by one. So it's sort of like the old days, and we use cranes these days, but it's basically all the same deal. So all of our barns would have had this, the bent assembled on the deck, tipped up, and joined together down the line. There's one of our completed frames down in North Carolina, all red oak, and the entire thing is held together with pegs. And luckily, I mean, you hope, you keep your fingers crossed that everything is going to fit together as you imagined. Usually there's some snafus, but generally, with proper planning and design, it comes together quite nicely. I mean, even in the one single timber frame, not to mention all the siding, all the floor pieces and stuff, but a frame itself has hundreds and hundreds of individual pieces, all of which have been sort of loved up by a craftsman. Here's a local Adams County timber frame by my friend and colleague, Lee Sorensen. It's a stage at Granite Hill Campground. I mean, truly stunning, inspiring work. This is just further background here. I won't dwell too much on this, but this was one of my biggest projects over in Shippensburg, called the Dykeman Hatch House. It was an old limestone fish hatchery built in 1871. It was basically a ruin, built in the water with fish dikes and water levels and stuff. And we did a new timber frame roof and a complete masonry reconstruction, new headers, window jambs, new timber frame roof system. And you can see some of the level of craftsmanship. Some of this compound joinery you see here is by my good buddy, Peter Bugler, who's also a local craftsman. We've got a lot of good people locally, which is great. The interior of the new roof there, going up to a cupola. We reconstructed a Italianate cupola chimneys, cedar shingle roof, new windows, custom-made shutters and all that stuff, and there it was after it was all done. So I just say this because I'm part of a team of local craftspeople that have worked hard together to revive and continue these same kind of skills and you know, this passion for craftsmanship and the architecture and vernacular representation of our, you know, historic architecture over the years. So when I got wind, I guess 15 years ago, that HGAC was launching a barn preservation project, I was really excited about it, certainly. And it's pretty incredible. You know, HGAC goes back to 1975. You know, its mission statement includes the imperative to foster and participate in the preservation, interpretation, and welfare of the historic, architectural, scenic, and culturally significant resources throughout the county. And, you know, it's been a really stalwart organization. But the Barn Preservation Project over the past 15 years has really become sort of a flagship program for the organization. And we basically have a three-pronged approach. I mean, we have so many barns in the county. It's just a treasure trove of barns. You can see here on this graphic, all the dots in green represent barns throughout the county. And then the red ones are barns that are on the Adams County Barn Registry, which we'll get into in a little bit more detail in a couple minutes in terms of our surveying regime. But yeah, I mean, there's at least 1,500 barns in the county. And if you count like in-ground barns, in-town barns, like there's a lot of little barns sprinkled out through the alleys. We might have almost 2,000 barns just within our little corner of the world. So we've got a resource that needs to be protected, and certainly a landscape that is unmatched. I'd like to read an excerpt from it was a letter to from a Confederate soldier that was just so impressed with the area's agrarian development. He described the landscape through which they rode on the way to Gettysburg back in 1863. He said, "It was the most thoroughly improved which I ever saw. There was not a foot of surplus or waste territory. All had been made to answer the demands of the consumer. Wheat, corn, clover, half a dozen varieties of grass, rye, barley, all in full growth and approaching maturity, met the eye at every turn, all enclosed in rock or strongly and closely built wooden fences. Apples, cherries, currants, pears, quinces in the utmost profusion, and beehives ad infinitum." And here's my favorite part, and it makes me choke up a little bit. The barns were, however, the most striking feature of the landscape, for it was one bright panorama for miles. I mean, it's been that way for a long time. You know, certainly the barn as sort of a discrete, bounded architectural economic unit, wherein a family could, you know, eke out a living in a frontier and then slowly build their farmstead. It's something that we live with every day. We see it, and I think a lot of us take it for granted. That these kinds of scenes that you see here is something that we're going to see forever. So in terms of barns, you know, we're trying to work to preserve these as much as we can. It's almost a losing battle. You know, at the end of the presentation, I have some sort of horrible pictures of demolished barns as sort of a call to action. But here are just some of them. I mean, a beautiful stone Schweitzer in Quaker Valley up here by Biglerville. 1920s gambrel roof extravaganza in Fairfield, the Brown Barn. The Lady Barn, which was restored by the Gettysburg Battlefield Preservation Society with its, you know, Victorian Italianate cupolas, also used as a field hospital during the after the battle. Beautiful old Schweitzer barn. Here's a great stone Schweitzer owned by Bill and Bonnie Braun, who are on our HGAC members and contributors, with a new roof the past few years. Of course, it's all about the animals, so you got to get a cow shot in there for sure. Demonstrate the beauty of the cantilevered forebay that's present in pretty much, you know, in all Pennsylvania barns. An 1817 brick and barn, very early, incredible timber framing inside. This was a recipient of our Barn Preservation Award 3 years ago, repurposed for a event venue. Another brick ender and another award winner from 2 years ago. You know, the barn started small, very rustic. You know, most of them were log crib. This to me is basically like the pinnacle of the Pennsylvania barn. I mean, it's there's 96 louvers on it, and in the back there's 4 silos. Just incredible stuff. Here's the George Spangler barn that is owned by the Gettysburg Foundation. Granite diabase outshed on the left and a wood one on the right. Cedar shingle roof. This is a just an incredible structure that they lavished just incredible resources on, and it's going to be a really great opportunity for us to use in our program going forward. And just the interiors. I mean, this one was cleaned up and has a new plywood floor, but it just shows you the just the expanse. And I mentioned the cathedral-like presence of the barn itself. You go in and you just keep looking up and up and up, and there's just timbers, and every single one has been cut. Just the amount of time to build these things is incredible. This is number 350, the Georgechronister barn, with an unusual combination of a brick outshed on your left and a stone one on the right. These would have been granaries back when it was up and running in its original configuration. The McPherson barn out there at the First Day's Battle. Kendra mentioned my ancestor, James Hemphill Maclay, was there like 200 yards from here with Cooper's Battery B, with canister shot, I think, at that point on the first day, and then ended up down there at the Bloody Angle. Here's an interesting 1820s early Schweitzer barn to the left with a Gothic roof addition from the 1940s. So really we're looking at a window of like 150 years for the barns that you see every day, probably stretching back 1750s in the county, but most of them have been built, you know, between 1790 and 1920. So really pretty narrow window. Of course, we have our celebrity barns too, the beautiful brown barn, constructed, I think it was 1913, out there on the Cashtown Road. Really a stunning example. And again, you know, we came from humble means, tiny log cabin barns that reflected basic survival. And then over the years, as prosperity and technology and transportation, they were expressions of prosperity and of hope. You know, really, to me, every time you see a barn, every barn construction is really an expression of hope, you know, from those builders for their family, for the community, and really for country. We were building a nation over the course of this time period. Here's our intrepid leader, Kurt Musselman, who's been our founding executive director since 2005. This is his family barn, built in the 1820s. You know, he still lives there. Beautiful structure. But getting into, and hopefully my time, if I start rambling on, somebody keep track of time here for me. All right, okay. So I mentioned our three-prong approach. I mean, first of all, with a historic resource, you have to make sure people know what it is. You know, education and outreach are really one of the main thrusts of our group. So we've over the years hosted numerous yearly events. We've had the Barn Art Show and Sale that has transformed our beloved GAR Hall there in Gettysburg into an art gallery. Here you can see people hobnobbing it with probably 90 works of art, all barn related. If there's any sale, HGAC got a little commission off of it. Just a lot of fun. And the artists just get a kick out of displaying their work, and it's amazing to see. I mean, barns are such a evocative, kind of inspiring architectural expression that, you know, certainly artists would want to capture what they could, and they do. And we've had that every year since I think this would have been our 15th year. Yeah, unfortunately, it's not happening again this year with COVID. We had to bag it last year as well. Every other year we have a Civil War dance, which is a lot of fun, hosted by Jim and Jane Shord up at Beach Springs Farm in Ortana. And a lot of people come dressed in period attire. We have the Susquehanna Travelers with period music and a lot of food, and just a lot of great activity. Just a great way to showcase the project. Yeah, and when the lights go down, you can certainly feel transported back in time. Also, our home base, as many of you know, is the GAR Hall. It was an 1822 Methodist church that was, you know, vacant for many years before and after the battle, used as a hospital after the battle, and then ended up being Grand Army of Republic meeting hall for probably 30 to 40 years. And we, HGAC got it in 1981, I think, and did a pretty impressive restoration. So, you know, we host barn preservation talks and seminars there. Also, of course, the Apple Museum has been a host to our survey training workshops, where we try to get more volunteers to help us in our surveying adventures. There's our president, Ann Zabawa, who you may know, has been a real champion of the project and a really transformative leader, you know, in her 5 years as president. There's goof off a little bit too. There's me and Greg Kaufman. I see Greg, you're sporting some whiskers there. And Greg, you know, if there was one great thing out of our survey training workshop last year, or 2019, it would be Greg, because he's been on like 60 surveys so far. Barns of the Susquehanna, we had a big fundraiser, very successful, full crowd for the airing of that film. Our barn tour series has been really great, and I wanted to mention that to everybody here too today, that excuse me, we had to cancel it last year, but on September 18th this year, we hope to pull it off. It's going to be great. Most of our earlier tours have been like a bus where you go around all day on the bus, and it's been great. But this year it's going to be a self-guided tour with a program, 6 different barns throughout the county. And each barn will have different stations, like a timber framing demonstration. We're going to have some Underground Railroad historical interpretation in Quaker Valley. Just, yeah, artists, like plein air artists at one barn. So it should be pretty exciting. And I'll make sure to forward that information to you guys so you can spread the word. Here's one of our earlier tours. We usually get a pretty good turnout. Here we are back in, I think, 2014 for our stone barn tour. So yeah, we'll just keep in touch on that one. Hopefully I'll rope in a whole bunch of DAR members to show up for that. Also last year, HGAC has spearheaded a investing in youth initiative. in the past couple of years, which has sought to foster the next generation of tradespeople, whether it's masonry, timber framing, general historic restoration, carpentry. So we jumped on board and did a timber framing demonstration at the tech prep at the Gettysburg High School, and we built like a mini timber frame structure with the kids, you know, start to finish. They got to use all the tools, so it was fun. It was a great way to reach out to the kids because, you know, I'm at 51 today on my birthday. I'm generally one of the younger guys in HGAC, and my cohorts, you know, in timber framing and stuff, we sort of lament the lack of the youngsters coming up through the ranks, whether it's in a volunteer organization or in the trades itself. Yeah, I think the outreach to these young kids is crucial. So that was fun, and they just had the greatest time. So wanted to mention too, the year of the Pennsylvania barn. We've been very fortunate, and possibly because of our proximity to Harrisburg, but also because of our contacts with Kurt Musselman, our director, and our other leaders in the program. We petitioned and the state legislature and introduced a resolution to declare 2015 the year of the Pennsylvania barn. And it was more than just a symbolic gesture, I guess. I mean, it'll help the state preservation organizations go forward as they try to craft a statewide barn preservation initiative. And in a lot of senses, they're looking to us to look as a model, which is very gratifying. There's Kurt Musselman, our fearless leader, there at the Capitol steps. Moving on to like the next level of activity is the barn preservation, the barn registry. We have been out as a crew of about 10 to 15 volunteers over the past 15 years, have documented, visited 365 of our county's barns. So as you drive around the county, basically almost 1 in 4 of the barns that you see are on the registry. Basically, we've developed a new survey form in the past couple of years that documents, you know, siding, measurements, roof pitch, classification, all the openings. We, you know, talk about wood types, how the wood is cut, what kind of fasteners are used. It's been one of those things where, look, when we started, you know, we knew a lot about barns or something, but then, you know, hundreds of barns later, you realize I really know a lot more than I did. So I want to write that down too. So it's sort of like the more you see, the more you can see. So we've developed a pretty in-depth survey form that documents all these permutations of the barns throughout the county. Here's Kurt talking to one of our buddies there at the Dutch door. And really the great thing about the survey itself, the outing, is connecting with the owner, because owners are really that, we talked about the rubber meets the road there at the grassroots level. It's owners that ultimately have these barns' fate in their hands. How far they value them, if they put value on them, how much they're able to budget to fix these barns, which is, as you know, is daunting to a lot of people. But I think with the combination of the education and outreach, then the follow-up with individual owners at their barns, we basically give each owner a tour of their own barn, hear their stories, which are always great, just to get that extra context. People living there for, you know, 60, 70 years. But then even these people that have lived there their whole lives, we're able to give them additional context, point out inscriptions they'd never seen, just sort of give that eagle eye look that really reinforces their own sense of value in the resource that they are caretakers of. Because for them, it's really, you know, asset versus liability. You know, do I tear it down? What can I do to fix it up? Here we are measuring again. Buddy Paul Mangan. There's Kendra DeBaney, who was a barn preservation specialist before me. Good old John Horner, you guys might know him here and there. And there's our littlest surveyor a couple years ago. This is actually in the Apple Museum barn. This is my daughter Claire, who has been into more barns than probably most people in Adams County at this point. She's the next generation. Yeah, we usually do sketches of the barns. Here's some fancy sketching that Bob McElhenney, our Director of Development, did for our upcoming field guide, which has been in the works for quite some time. And they get a plaque. Also, we have a Barn Owl newsletter that Bob McElhenney does as well, that sort of keeps people apprised of different developments and events. That will be coming out soon. I'll make sure. The main questions they had is there funding to help me do this? Because every single barn in the county needs a lot of work, thousands, tens of thousands of dollars of work over the next 10 to 15 years to keep them standing. So we developed the Barn Preservation Project grant program, kicked off in 2013. And to date, I think we've had 17 barns receive grants, nearly $30,000 dispersed to these barn owners. And we found that it's actually kickstarted a lot more. It's a matching grant. So that sort of initial burst of money has sort of spearheaded and spurred a lot more preservation activity on the barn owners' part than just what we've contributed. We also, so many times when I talk to owners, they say, I had a contractor come in, they said it's going to take $70,000 to fix this thing. And not many of us have that kind of bank account out there ready to roll. So one thing we always try to do is help them prioritize the projects, chunk it out, and try to sort of isolate discrete projects that will have the maximum impact on the barn's longevity. So that's been a very successful approach. Here's the Guernsey barn right down the road from Edie that's getting new siding on its water tower there. There's one of our early grant projects up in York Springs, 1804 ground barn with later Victorian additions and cupolas. But you can see on this far side, it was in really rough shape. We had to dismantle a bunch of it, get some new siding, and then ultimately it's, you know, if not perfect original form, it's standing. Here's a root cellar at the Borat barn that was in danger of collapse. One of our mason contractors who's on our artisan listing on our website, we have about 30 vetted, very talented artisans on this listing that barn owners can contact for work on their barn. Here he's reconstructing the masonry, and here's Kurt looking at the finished work. Here's Ellen Dayhoff's barn. You can see it was just sort of a mess there on that gable end wall. And there's the check presentation extravaganza at the end. The Reitler barn, a sort of ailing brick end barn with a blown out rear wall. See all the stone is just sort of completely shot with the earth pressure and water pressure coming in. And here's the finished project. So some expertly, seamlessly worked back together. Last year's the Clean Air barn with a very leaky old ribbed steel roof. And last year's we dispersed a grant to help them replace the roof system, excuse me, and then put on a whole new roof system. So we're fighting a good fight, and we're really getting good stuff done. You know, our grant program is really a unique program because most grant allocations are to municipalities or nonprofits, and there's really not that much fundage out there for private owners of historic structures. So we're very proud of that, and we're working with the State Historic Preservation Office, Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission, and also a statewide barn group called Historic Barns and Farm Foundation of Pennsylvania, to sort of try to take our template from our grant program that's been so successful and sort of apply that on a statewide level. So that's gratifying, and it's actually very promising for counties outside of Adams County. Because as I said, we have just this glorious resource that's year by year just falling apart. You know, do we want this? This is a shot out sort of off of our hill, and there's probably 6 barns in this photo. They go back, you know, stretching back from like 1780 up until you know, 1910. You know, do we want this, or do we want this? You know, this is a barn that got taken down this summer out on Old Harrisburg Road. Again, in this photo, there's probably, if you zoomed in, you could probably get 20 different historic barns in this photograph. Just stunning stuff. Do we want this, or do we want that? There's another one that went down this year. It's just so disheartening to see when you drive by one day and then you drive by the next and it's gone inexplicably. We have this beautiful stone Schweitzer here, and then half a mile away you have this, you know, decrepit barn that's been neglected and is not going to be here for very much longer. Classic Pennsylvania barn, or just a heap of smoking rubble. And actually this one broke my heart. It's just north of Mummersburg, on the Mummersburg Road, you know, between Mummersburg and Arnottsville. Just a fine, sort of small ground barn. Nothing wrong with it really structurally. Need a little paint, a roof coating. Drove by, took this picture, and then here it is as of about 2.5 weeks ago, just gone. So just the notion of barns, you know, barns as sort of an isolated, sort of geeky, wonky kind of focus, just in terms of the, you know, the timber framing and the architectural precedent and just the development of this unique architectural form. That's great, and I love that, but it's more about the context of the landscape, about what it means to us as Adams Countyans, really as Americans. I mean, the battlefield is part of a larger context, as I said, with the, you know, Confederates' description of marching to Gettysburg. Without Adams County as a whole and our landscape preserved, our architecture, our history, it's really, it would be diminished. And so we're trying to do our part to make sure that this doesn't happen, and that we can have this for the future. This is me and my daughter, and nothing better than seeing a barn filled with hay, of the promise of the future. And it's really for these guys, for these kids, that little jaunt down the gravel trail to the barn. We're hoping that, you know, 100, 200 years from now, that we'll still have this richness that we have today. So thank you.